Hi, and welcome to Mind That Childminder, a podcast that's meant for well-ass childminders. I'm your host and colleague Charlotte, and today we're going to be talking all about how childminders can really utilise books. If you didn't know, this year, 2026, is the National Year of Reading, and we're going to talk about how childminders are really uniquely placed to really bring a love of reading to young children's lives. I'm going to be joined by James Boddy, who is the founder of Early Insights. He's an early years consultant, trainer and speaker with a passion for helping childminders and other early years professionals create environments where children can truly thrive. He draws on extensive experience across the early years sector, and James supports childminders as well as nurseries and schools through consultancy, professional development and practical evidence-informed strategies that really put children at the heart of learning. Through Early Insights, he champions reflective practice, meaningful outdoor learning and strong relationships, inspiring practitioners to build happy, connected and enriching experiences for every child. And just to note, he is actually the son of a childminder, and childminding was a really big influence into how he even got into early years in the first place. So fully expect that this chat will be full of passion and positivity towards childminders and books. So without further ado, let's grab that cuppa and let's get chatting. So welcome in, James, and thank you so much for being here today.
Hello, Charlotte. Thank you for inviting me. It's fantastic.
Yes, welcome to Mind That Childminder. And I think we're going to have a really interesting discussion today. And we've particularly chosen books. And before we even delve into the subject, I just really wanted to dig into kind of what your relationship is to childminding, because I think it's a bit odd for a childminding podcast to have someone on who works in early years but is not a childminder. So I just really wanted to dig into that a little bit as to why you want to kind of be on here talking to childminders.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So I worked in early years for 20 years. So I started out as an apprentice, worked in nurseries, schools, owned a nursery. And then I sold a nursery 3 years ago. And since then, I've been an early years consultant, really focused hard on outside, but also my passion is childminders. And the reason my passion is childminders is growing up, my mum was a childminder. So I was growing up in a house full of lots of lovely children, babies, all the way up to school. And that really had a huge influence on my life, my career, and all aspects of my life, really. Because lots of people ask me, how did I get into early years? You know, there's 3% of the early years workforce is male. What's my story? How did I get into this? And I always say it was that childminding background made such a huge influence. And I believe passionately that childminders are hugely important. And that's what I do now as an early years consultant. I'm very lucky. I go out to nurseries, prep schools, but my real passion is childminders. And I go out to childminders throughout the week to support them in lots of different ways. So that's why I'm here to talk about stories and books and everything else, but really focused on childminding.
So when we were talking about what we could even chat about to support childminders for this episode, we decided on books. And I think it was mostly because this year 2026, in case you're a time traveler from the future, is the National Year of Reading. And we're thinking about kind of, we often think about these things in stats of kind of 1 in 3 children enjoy reading, which is the lowest kind of amount of pleasure for reading that we've had since the question was asked in 2005 by the National Literacy Trust. So we often talk about stats with reading, but when you think about reading for pleasure, none of it's about stats. So it feels really discordant to me that we only think about reading and all of these facts and figures, but actually it's passion driven. So I wondered why you kind of want to talk about books today. Is it kind of thinking about the statistics, or is it thinking more on a personal level? What's your into books?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think the statistics are important, but for me, it comes from a place of personal experience, nursery experience, going into childminders, knowing children, having my own daughters as well, who have gone from the one was from a very early age interested in reading, loves reading, still loves reading now. Our second child, our second daughter, was a bit more of a challenge. She didn't naturally kind of gravitate to books, even though our house is full of books. So she waited and waited and waited, and then she found a book that she absolutely loved, which was the Captain Underpants books. Now she loves reading. She's downstairs right now with her mum, reading outside in the garden. So it's an ideal situation, really. I think books are incredibly important. I think they offer a wealth of benefits for children across all 7 areas and beyond that as well. So that's why I really wanted to come on to talk about books, because I think sometimes they're overlooked as a resource. I know from my experience going out to visit people, they're kind of sometimes in a corner. They're used throughout the day sporadically. And what I want to really talk about is how books can spread out through your setting and become part of the day, because that's how books become important, is when children see them as a resource that's always there. It's not something that they go off to do. It's something that's there throughout the day to enjoy, to reference, to kind of act out, all of these wonderful things. So that's why I'm really glad I've got the opportunity to come on here and hopefully pass on some passion about books. So I'm sure we're all passionate, but just thinking of different ways of using books and how they can enhance the lives of children.
So, thinking about kind of what books we're going to choose, I think actually the question to answer is the why. Why are we choosing particular books? And I know that most of us understand that we're choosing language rich books or increasing vocabulary and all of these other kind of things relating to language and literacy development. But I think that when I read your blog, which I will link to in the show notes, you were talking about a concept that really thought about the why behind the choice of books. So could you explore that a little bit with us today?
Yes, yeah, sure. So Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop had a concept, the professor, she had a concept called windows, mirrors, and sliding doors. And this is a really important concept to look at when you're looking at what books you've got on your shelves. So first you have the mirrors concept. And there you need to have books where children can see themselves, their culture, their family background in. So that's like those stories like I Am Welcome. There's stories about families, there's stories about different cultures. So what we want children to be able to do is feel represented and welcomed in your book corner on your bookshelf. Because what we want them to do is to pick it up and go, I have breakfast like that, or my granddad looks like that, or all those kinds of situations that can come up. So there's really important that children can see themselves mirrored in the books, same as throughout the whole environment, but it's really important about books because when we're thinking about books, it's connections. We're connecting the paper book with our own lives, and that can only happen with children if they can see themselves mirrored back. Next one is these windows. So we have mirrors so we can see ourselves. Then the other important thing about books is they're windows into other lives. So the easy tick box exercise for this would be, you're looking at books around Chinese New Year or you're looking at books around Hanukkah, but you need to go deeper into these things, not just focus on those topics and those themes, as you say, feelings, family backgrounds, bereavement, all of those kind of things can be spoke about in books.
I think it's also really important to focus on that one as childminders because generally our ratios are that much smaller that
Yes.
we can quite often be in a very narrow kind of culture, as it were, within the setting. At the moment, for example, in my setting, I care for only girls, only white girls. And
Yeah.
so I have to really make sure that my resources reflect a whole range of kind of languages, abilities, and gender, and all of the rest of it. Because otherwise, I could quite honestly have 3 or 4 white girls who go to school and have never had any experience of any other culture or language or gender or anything.
Yeah.
So I think as childminders, because our ratios are so small usually, that concept of windows is going to be really important because we might not be able to access all of these different kind of elements in our everyday practice. I think we can if we go to lots of kind of toddler groups or meet with other childminders, those things also help. But if you're in a very small village like me,
Yeah.
it's already quite small in my setting, and then the village is also quite small, and it kind of like, if I'm not careful, that could quite easily layer up into, oh, these children have not had enough different people opportunity. So I think that concept within the books is quite useful because it's an easy way for me to get that in without having to go anywhere.
Yeah, and that's it. You can have a range of books. So one childminder I went out to 2 weeks ago had a range of books on a range of different subjects, not out at the same time. They would rotate them. So they would go to toddler groups, and toddler groups are fantastic. So they were talking about how in these toddler groups, they meet different same-sex parents, they meet different cultures, they meet different languages, these children, and it opens their eyes. And then the book can help with this so they can learn about it more. It can not just be something that happens an hour a week, but it can be something that it's interweaving throughout the week. So you can come back to it and you can say, oh, look, these look like, these are acting the same way as those couple are on in the toddler group, and all those kind of things that just help it all kind of make sense to children, because that's what they need. They need, a lot of the time, they need time to stop, reflect, and think about it. And if you kind of keep repeating it, same with maths concepts, same with all these other concepts, this begins to make sense. But as I say, I think you're absolutely right. I think childminders ratios are so small sometimes, and you can find yourself with children of the same sex or the same, all of those kind of things. And it's important to kind of try and open eyes and open hearts to all the different wonderful people in the world. Yeah.
Another, I was just thinking about a particular book that's a favourite of ours at the moment, and it's called What Happened to You? And it's about a little boy who's got one leg, and lots of children keep on saying, oh, what happened to you? What happened to your leg? And he doesn't really want to answer the question. And
Yes.
I think it's really important to have those types of books in the setting as a kind of window, because children can ask those kind of questions that feel a bit awkward, and if it was to happen in the moment, you might have a bit of a panic of like, oh, social etiquette, I don't quite know how to deal with the child asking
Yes.
questions. But if you already have had an exposure and answered those questions and kind of encourage them to kind of, how can we reword this so we're being a bit more sensitive, or how does it actually make that character feel that all these children are only looking at a missing leg, they're not actually playing the game he wants to play. And that's really helped highlight it's not just about again, like what different people's look like or what their family looks like, but it's also about how they feel if you only focus on those things. And we kind of want
Yes.
the stories to reflect an everyday experience. So when you have a same-sex couple in a book, you're not looking at just, oh, they're a same-sex couple in a book. You're kind of like, oh, these everyday things happen that are mirroring my life, but also
Yeah.
opening a window into their life. And it's just the same, but with this slight difference.
Yeah. And that's
So
why
it's
books work for everybody. Yeah.
mm,
So for some, it's a mirror, for some, it's a window. And then, yeah, and it works for everybody on that concept. So that's why I say those books are really important, because they can be both things at the same time. And that book you just mentioned is a really important one, because, yeah, as I say, it's not just about how you look, it's how they feel. But it's, as you said as well, it's being able, because children are naturally going to ask questions. They don't have the social etiquette that we have. So they're going to be asking questions and they're going to be trying to find out. And sometimes because of their language abilities and everything else, they're just going to come out and say a question. And as you say, you think, ooh, but yeah, that's just how they're trying to understand it. And then it's our role is to encourage respect, encourage curiosity, and encourage them to find out more. And then we can go out to these community groups, we can get visitors in, and we can find out more together. And that really leads to the next part, which is the sliding doors part. So we've got these windows, and then we develop these windows further into sliding doors. So that's when we open up the concept, step inside, and begin to understand more. So that could be all about finding out about what different cultures have for breakfast. So the Marley and Me books are fantastic for Grenadian and Caribbean understanding and their culture. And then in these books, they have different things for breakfast. They have different cultural parts of their day. And what you can do is you can go, okay, well, what does this mean? What does it mean for them? So in our setting, we had visitors in because I'm always a big fan of getting visitors in because they really understand the concepts. But you can speak to people at toddler groups, find out more, and then you can do activities, find out more together, and then you become more immersed in it, which helps with understanding, having that experience of what it actually means to be these people.
So the sliding doors is kind of a stepping into something that makes it more tangible. Is that what
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
saying? Okay.
yeah, definitely. So it's like when we're going on a bear hunt, we read the story, but then we actually go out on a bear hunt. So this is the same thing. So when we're talking about different same-sex marriages and different cultures, when we're out and experiencing, we can say, "Oh, remember that story we read about how they were making this for breakfast, or on this day of the week they do this?" And then you're playing it out, you're acting it out. I say it definitely helps if you have somebody in who can come out and speak to you about it, or if you're at a toddler group and you have somebody and you can get them, because not everyone's as confident as everybody else, but they can explain. Like Hanukkah is a great example of this. So we got a parent in to talk about it because they've lived it for 40 years. So they have a great understanding of what it means. And so they could come out and passionately speak about it. So it's those kind of stepping in, understanding, developing knowledge.
And I really like that you're tailoring these ideas to childminding, because it is much harder to get visitors in, especially when you think like if we think of the traditional visitors like dentists and doctors and these kind of things, they're not usually very willing to come in for three children. So I
Yes,
like
yeah,
that
yeah.
you're thinking about ways that we can actually do that as a childminder, and it's not just some like ideal best scenario that we can't actually
Yeah,
achieve.
yeah. And
So
I think these
thank you.
yeah, sorry, carry on.
No, I was just saying thank you for bearing that in mind.
Yeah, and these toddler groups. So every childminder I've been to see so far, the toddler groups are fantastic. Just opening eyes, different resources, socialization, confidence is a big one as well. So having that confidence, and a lot of the childminders I speak to say, right, to start with, when we first go, they're sat on my lap like a traditional kind of key person approach, and then they grow in confidence, and then they go out and meet other children, play with these new resources. So I think those childminding groups that you get set up, or those toddler groups, are really, really important for opening eyes, opening understanding.
Now that we have kind of thought about the why behind books, so we're keeping in mind this windows and mirrors and doors. I feel like I'm at some kind of like housing redevelopment area. But windows and
Yes.
mirrors and doors, we're thinking about how are we going to use that concept to choose books? What are we choosing? Kind of lots of animal books, or like just things that our children are interested in? How are we going to connect that concept that you have been discussing to actual real life? This is how I'm going to choose books.
Yeah. So I would say there's probably three things to say on this. The first one is to get to know the children, get to know the children, get to know the families as much as possible, as quickly as possible. So every family is different, every child is different. So what you need to be knowing before the child starts, and this is quite important if you've got new children starting in September, is gather that information. I always used to say to new parents, I'd have them in, I'd show them around, I'd get to know them personally. I'd set up my stall and I'd say, this is what I do. This is what we do at this setting. And then I would say, you cannot give me too much information. So if you want to write down an A4 piece of paper, that's fine. I would have parents send in multiple double-sided pieces of paper of what their child likes to do, what their favorite book is, what their favorite type of cereal is, and all this kind of stuff. And I think that's great because the more information you give me, the better I can adapt and support your child to transition in and then feel comfortable, build relationships, and yeah, make good developmental steps forward. So by getting to know them, you can find out, okay, what's their family background? What's their culture? What do they like to do? What's their weekend kind of activities they like to do? And then you can start building up a kind of a bank of stories. And the best childminder I went to see had a bank of books, and she'd know, okay, so on Monday, these group of children comes in. Charlie really likes castles. So I know he likes castles. He lives with his mum. all of these kind of concepts. So then she would adapt the book corner, which was fantastic. I'm not saying every childminder does this, but I thought this was fantastic practice. So she would get out a range of books that were almost perfect for Charlie. Some that were mirrors, some that were windows that Charlie would understand and could look at and talk about, and some were based on what they were doing all together. So I think they were not growing caterpillars, but turning caterpillars into butterflies. So they were books about that as well. And I thought, well, that's brilliant. So she knew that child really well. And then the next day, there would be a different load of books come out. And then when I asked her about this, she said, yeah, so in my bank of books, there's books about lots of things. So she showed me books about bereavement, because in the past, you'd had a child who sadly had lost a sister. And she said, we have these books and we talked about it and all those kind of things. And the second point I would say is get to know your librarian. I don't know how many librarians you know, but every librarian I've met is fantastic. So just the other day, I went to the librarian and said, I'm doing this podcast and I want to talk about books and all this. And I want to talk about non-fiction books. And I really want a book about castles. And she said, oh, come with me, James. And we found a book about castles. So I would say definitely get to know your librarian as well. So when you're thinking about books, you can go to the library as a group, ideally. We used to take the children to the library once a week. But yeah, you can say, well, I've got this child who's going through this, they're moving house, and they'll find you a book. And it just makes it so much easier. So yeah, I'd definitely say build relationships, get to know the children, and also get to know your librarian and go to the library. And then children have a say on what books they're choosing as well, because there's nothing better. I'm a bit of a nerd, but there's nothing better than going to the library with children and getting them to choose their book, bringing it back, because that feels so special to them. And they're like, this is my book. This is the book that I chose. And then they get to take it back and they learn to love the library. And I think libraries are massively underused, especially here, underused and undervalued. So as a childminder, I would definitely highly recommend using your library.
Libraries are a fabulous resource in many different ways, but I think it can be a little bit of a postcode lottery, so it's worth checking your local library. I can only talk from my experience, but in my libraries we have kind of the story time, rhyme time sessions that we can go along to, and we're always really welcome. And actually we're really welcome because we bring lots of children, which is really unusual. Usually that's a real like, no, go away. But for those sessions, it's really positive because they're quite under attended often, that when you bring lots of children, it suddenly ramps the whole session up. So you're very welcome usually at story times and rhyme times. It's also worth looking if your local authority has different types of library cards, because when I started childminding, I said that I wanted a childminder's card, and they were absolutely like, there's no such thing as a childminder's card. I was like, well, I can't really borrow children's books on my card, and I don't have a child, so I need a childminder's card. And they didn't have such a thing, but they did have kind of a nursery card. And the nursery card that they had was kind of an educational setting where they could borrow more books, like 20 books, and for longer periods of time. So it's really, and I argued that, well, I'm an education provider and that would be really helpful actually to have books for longer periods of time, and actually that I can borrow them because I can't on my adult card. So there was and so I have a nursery card even though I'm a childminder. So it's worth asking at your local library if there is a similar scheme so that you can borrow books for that longer period of time if you're covering a theme.
Yeah, because you can look ahead and go, right, okay, so we're going to be in autumn soon. So we're going to be talking about autumn. So let's start thinking about collecting these autumn books ready for that. So yeah, you can really do that. And one thing I'd say as well is sometimes it's a confidence thing. And I remember when I first floated the idea of taking 10 children to the library, somebody said, I can't take children to the library. Libraries are for quiet and for people to not hear noise and children. And I was like, well, no. And you go there. And as I say, it's a postcode lottery, but our librarian is so happy to see them. He's just like, yes, this is what we want. We want children in the library enjoying books. We want them to have this weekly experience of coming in. Wow, look at all these books. So yeah, it might be a little bit scary at start, but once you get in there, you'll find, hopefully, they're all nice and friendly, and it's a great place to go. It's nice for community. And what we found as well is that it actually kind of, by taking the children influenced the parents. So they were like, "Come on, Dad, let's go to the library," and we kind of had a bit of a snowball effect, which was really good.
The other thing, to get the confidence to do that, I highly suggest having a rights-based approach, because if you think to yourself, the children have a right to read, the children have a right to access public space, the children, you then walk in going, well, we're all here and we've got the right to be here, and you're not going to let them trash the place and run around screaming and all the rest of it. So they have the right to be there, and if you believe that as your rights-based approach, you're not then going to be worried about, oh, they're not supposed to be here. It kind of flips your confidence into, no, I know they've got the right, and I'm going to help them meet that right. They haven't got the right to trash the place, and they haven't got the right to disturb everyone else intentionally. If you go with a rights-based approach into those environments, I find that increases your confidence, because you're doing the right thing by children, and that's kind of the most important part of our job. And when we're talking about kind of what books to choose, I just want to highlight that there's this, I'm going to say company or organisation called Bag Books. And my local library does stock them. And it was only a random poster that I walked past. And when I asked the library staff, nobody knew what it was. I'm like, but it's in your library. Nobody had asked about them before. So I'm going to highlight it. I care for a child with very significant cognitive and physical disabilities. And these bag books are for children and adults with kind of learning difficulties. And they're multi-sensory stories. So they've got a very short story that you just read out from a page. But the pages of the books are these big, often wooden kind of pages that have some kind of interactive element, whether it's a texture or a musical instrument on it. It might have a huge puppet of a seagull in it for like a seaside story, and it has about 10 different props in the story, and they're very short stories, so it's more about the interaction with the props. If you can borrow those, if you have a child with additional needs, it's really worth looking into those, because because all the children like them. It appeals to all children. They're intended for people with learning difficulties, but all of the children enjoy them because they're so multi-sensory and so involving, that it's a really rare opportunity to get such a natural inclusive experience, because they're sharing that experience. So you can all sit together, and you don't really have to make very many kind of special adaptions or focus too much on kind of a disability or a difference. You're just all sharing the experience just really naturally, and we're all having fun. And it's such a rare thing to have, where you don't have to almost force something or overly think about something. It just happens. So if you have bag books available, I highly, highly, highly recommend them, because it creates that shared moment that's really hard to achieve, especially if you have a child. The child I care for is 6 and is non-mobile, so it's quite difficult when all the children run off to play somewhere. I have to transfer her using physiotherapy techniques into a wheelchair, and then to chase, to then move her. This experience is kind of, we're all sat together and all sharing this at the same time. And I think books in general can do that, but just it's really a cherry on the top of the cake. The bag books, they were such a great discovery, so I highly, highly recommend them.
And sometimes people say, oh, we've got props. And I think, oh, that's good. Props are good. But then when they get down to reading the story with props, it's kind of like you give the child something, you go, well, you hold this now, and then you hold this now. And it's not really a prop. It's not an interactive prop. It's just getting them to hold something. And then, of course, they get distracted by the thing and they've disengaged from the story then. So it's kind of like it's not really a prop, it's just giving them something to hold. So yeah, when these props are interactive or they intertwine between the story, it's so much better and it brings the story to life. Like you say, it's a cherry on top, really, rather than just a prop that is, okay, I have to hold the apple, they're holding 2 oranges, all that kind of stuff. It's not adding anything, is it? But yeah, that sounds really good. What was that called again? Bag books.
Bag books.
Okay, no,
They're
I haven't heard
really,
that
really
one.
good. We have talked about, let's summarize, because it's quite hard sometimes to stick along a main point, and I want everybody to catch these really important points around the discussion. So we're thinking about the concept of mirrors reflecting the child back at them. We've got windows, being able to see into other situations that they might not be familiar with. And then we've got our sliding doors, which lets them open the door and step into various kind of almost realities. So it could also be kind of sci-fi. You could go off into space or wherever. So we've got that. And now we've got our, okay, we know how to choose books. We're going to buy some on different, with all of these themes, and we know why we've got the books and what books we've got. But now what do we do with them? We're often in our home, so we might not want necessarily to have 100 different shelves of children's books everywhere. Quite often childminders want to be able to put away the children's things at the end of the day and not really see them as much because they don't want their house to look like a nursery. And I also have quite a strong opinion that children are going to be in education settings from, kind of formal education settings. This is typically from 5 years old all the way up to 16/18. So I don't feel like my setting should be a mini school because they're already going to spend a huge amount of their lives like that. And I don't feel the need to put that any earlier or replicate that. So how do we put everything that you've said so far about the concept and what books, we've got the why and the what, how are we going to do that as childminders and just make it really unique to childminding? I think it could be like something really special. So how do you suggest we do that?
Yeah, so I always say to childminders, don't try and copy nurseries and schools because you are unique and you're special and you offer something far greater. And so I would say it's all about quality over quantity. Because as you said, too many books can be overwhelming. If I see a bookshelf, my wife doesn't like going to the library. I'm a big library fan. My wife doesn't like going to the library because she finds it quite overwhelming. She knows what kind of books she likes, but there's 400 kind of books in her section and she just no, she can't. So I think children are the same. If you have a busy bookshelf, where do I start? What do I grab? So I always have the concept of quality over quantity. Don't worry about having too many books. Maybe you know that there's one in the cupboard that this child needs right now, but just have a few good books. And so there's one concept which I always talk about, which is making sure they're accessible. So accessible and everywhere. So what would be better is if you had 8 stories out that are perfect for the 3 children you've got that day, and you have 2 in the cozy corner, maybe dealing with feelings or some sort of concept. You have 2 outside talking about books and butterflies, because there's a lot of butterflies this year. So let's have a butterfly book outside. You have 1 in the construction area. So when they're building, so you might not see, but I've got a book here called I Am a Digger, and it's all about digging. And it's a fantastic book. And what you can do is you can be constructing with the bricks and you can be playing with these transport toys and you have a book there. So the book is not in a separate location all the way over there. You're playing, you're looking through the book. This character's doing this, let's do that. And I believe the books should be spread out throughout the environment. So I'd say outside's really important. And there's loads of non-fiction books that are perfect for this. And so we have books about birds. So if you find a bird egg, you can then go find a book. This is our book. This is what that bird egg is. It's blue, so that means it's this kind of bird. So when you spread the books through the environment, they become way, way better for children. They're not in a location away from play. They become part of play.
I think that something that is really underutilized in early years is non-fiction books. And I think that people quite often with young children think storytelling, stories are fun, stories are all these things. But non-fiction books are just kind of left at the sidelines. You might have the odd one or two, but they're not really seen as vital or interesting. And I quite often decide to keep magazines that get delivered through the door, kind of toy shops, garden centre. You quite often get Scottsdales kind of come through. And I'm also a National Trust member, so I get a hefty magazine once a year
Yes.
of all the places you can visit with your membership. And they're quite often just sat on my bookshelf. And they often will pull those out because they're quite easy to just flick through. They're getting the kind of book skills. And then they often draw your attention to something, especially the toy ones. The toy ones are very popular because they want to talk about that exciting thing that they've seen.
Yeah.
And or it's something they've seen on TV, or I've got a Toonie box, and these kinds of things happen with toy magazines. But how do you see fiction books, non-fiction books even? Fictions are stories, non-fiction books are kind of information and fact books. So kind of how do you think they could be kind of slid into a childminding setting?
Yeah. So I always think fiction books are what could be, and non-fiction is what is. So what they really offer is they offer kind of answers, but they also give more questions, which is great. So going back to your point about magazines, we used a lot of magazines. We used magazines in the book corner because, as you say, there's nothing better, even as an adult, to flick through the new Smith's Toy Superstore Christmas book and go, oh, I've got one of them. I like those. I like those. So it just opens discussions. But then also in the art area, we would use old magazines and we'd be very careful to say these ones are in the art area, cut these up, use them to make lovely collages and pictures. And then they cut out our National Trust magazines from a few years ago and our Gardener's World magazines because our library has all these magazines for free. So we would go there and we'd have lorries, we'd have Train Driver Weekly and all these crazy magazines. But there was just pictures in them. And obviously the words didn't really mean anything, but it's just pictures of different trains, different birds, different flowers. So I think fiction and non-fiction are both vitally important.
With not, we need to remember that the children we look after aren't us. So they might
Yes.
well be the person who only enjoys non-fiction books when they're an adult. There are lots of people who don't like fantasy, don't like romance, don't like crime, don't like, like all the books that we read. There are people who only like non-fiction books. And those people
Yeah.
begin somewhere, right? They're children first. So if they're always being forced to read storybooks, it could actually kill their love of reading. And in National Year of Reading, we really need to be promoting all the love of reading as much as possible. And so I think an easy way in to non-fiction books is to find books that our favourite book here is the Rainy Day activity book. So it's just a book that has got photos of different crafts you can do, and it is aimed at older children. It's kind of like, your 8-9-year-olds that can do these things pretty much independently, but we just choose one page at a time a day to look at if they choose it in their kind of like read together time. And their favorite page is the biscuit page. And it's got like a recipe, and then it's got all the different decorations you could like sprinkles and all these things, and we pretend to make the biscuit. So I read out the recipe, and then they hold their arms out like a bowl, and they put the ingredients in, and then they have to roll the dough in their hands, and so they're miming all of the actions, and they get so much joy out of reading a recipe. Like it sounds ridiculous, but it's a really easy way in. That, oh, here's this cake decorating book, look at all these interesting cakes that people can make, and then we could copy that with Play-Doh.
So that's where like the role play, the role play corner could be really useful for this. And we used to have recipe books from around the world. And that's another way of mirrors and sliding doors and all of those. So in our, well, it's like a home we do, and lots of families do have recipe books. And so I would go to the charity shop, get a range of recipe books, put them on, and they would just go through it and they go, right, today I'm making this. And then what is this? I don't know, but we kind of talk about it, and they would just get this and they'd get that and they'd be mixing it. And it's just a way of, and then some children be like, oh, I made that at home. I think my dad's made that, and all those kind of things. So it comes back to having those books available that you might not think, well, hold on, why would we do that? But no, it's enhancing that role play corner. It's giving them a link to home. It's opening their eyes to different foods from around the world. And it's just a really nice way of adding books, non-fiction books, to the environment. They're not cost a lot of money.
It's been so interesting talking about it, and I think it's one of those things that you could just talk for hours and hours about, because there's so much nuance and skill involved. But I just wanted to find out kind of what's your, very quickly, in kind of like a sentence, what's your top thing about reading when we're thinking of National Year of Reading, trying to get that passion for children to just enjoy books and reading? What's your kind of one sentence, this must, the most important, maybe two sentences?
So I would say, make it fun, make it everywhere, make it accessible. This is 3 sentences already, but I'm trying to go as fast as I can. Reflect on your books, make sure there's mirrors, windows, and sliding doors, and just expose children to as many experiences as possible. The more experience, the more development, the more they're going to understand. And libraries and childminding groups and toddler groups are great. That was like 100 sentences. Sorry, yeah.
We've talked about so much today. I just wanted to make sure that people could find out more about you if they really enjoyed what you were talking about today. Where would you signpost people to find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, so it's earlyinsights.co.uk. As I say, I work with childminders, nurseries, prep schools. I'm passionate about childminders. I think they need some support at times. And I also don't believe in lots of expensive support. Sometimes you just need a question answering. So what do I do here, James? And then I can just get back to you straight away. It's not always about the big things. It's just the little things that you need support with, because childminders are doing a fantastic job. It can be isolating. But yeah, it's nice to get some support and have somebody on your side. So earlyinsights.co.uk. I'm on Facebook and TikTok and all the other stuff.
And
Thank you very much for inviting me on.
I think what's important to say is, from everything we've talked about, is that your work doesn't encourage childminders to replicate large settings. And I think that's really valuable to add to the work that you do.
Yeah, definitely. I always advocate, you're not a nursery, you're not a little school. This is your home. It's really unique. And that's what I find all the time. I go to nurseries and they're all slightly unique. You go into childminder's home and they're totally unique. You don't know what you're going to walk into, what their dogs, their cats, their all of these kind of things. And you really need to embrace this. You need to go, I'm special, I'm unique, I'm offering something really awesome here for these children. And yeah, it's a case of doing that, not just trying to water down a nursery, because yeah, you can meet everything that's required of you and more. So yeah, don't get bogged down in seeing what nurseries are doing.
Great. Thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Bye-bye.
I think it's really clear to see that James has a real passion for all sorts of things relating to early years, but particularly for reading with young children. I also really love that James could pull it back and remember that childminders have different approaches, different challenges, and just different environments to other early year settings. And he could really see the value in that. And I think that's really positive going forward, that, you know, there are professionals out there who see us as equal and also with strengths that we can use. So rounding up today's conversation, I think it's worth remembering that books are for everyone. We don't need to judge anyone else's reading or think that there's only one type of book we should be reading to children. We can think about the mirrors and windows and sliding doors that James was talking about, but really it's just remembering that our books need to be inclusive for every child in our setting, but also opening those, you know, the eyes into new worlds and thinking about those books with a non-stereotypical approach. When we think of books that are talking about Chinese New Year, we want them to be really written by people who understand Chinese New Year and not just kind of a stereotype pumped out by a publisher. And also we want those activities to be really engaging. So we want the puppets, we want the story bags, we want the props used in a way that's really engaging for the children. What we don't want to do is to kill a love of reading by saying the types of book that we're reading are wrong, or that the kind of environment we're reading them in is only for specific times of the day. We want to make sure that those books are kind of woven through our practice, whether that's a child asking you a question and you saying, I think we've got a book about that, let's go find out together. Whether you read a book and they're doing an art activity in the book that you could actually just go and do. Remembering books are portable, we can take them out, we can have them with us on trips, we can have them in the garden, but also remembering that we do have that additional challenge, although it's also a benefit, but we do have that additional challenge of having mixed age ranges. So we need to make sure if we've got pop-up books that maybe they aren't just kept on the shelf because a baby is probably going to come along and rip it all to bits. So when we think about accessibility, yes, we want those things available to everyone, but we also need to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our mixed age ranges. It's been a really interesting conversation. I hope that it's helped you feel a bit more confident about how to choose books, why we're choosing books, and also that it is a skill and it isn't something that we say, oh, I'm just rubbish at reading stories to children, or I don't like to read stories to children. It is a skill, and when we think about skills are something we can learn. So it doesn't mean that if you find it challenging now, you're always going to find it challenging. And I hope that in itself instills a confidence for you to develop your skills in that. And it doesn't have to be kind of going on courses and things. It can be just as simple as watching someone else read a story and you copying them. So I hope that's helped. I hope it's been interesting and helped you either have a pause to reflect and think about your own practice and setting, or it's reinforced things that you already believed. I think there's lots of things we could be talking about with books, and how important they are and how diverse of a tool they can be in our setting. And until next time, I want you to make sure that you stay safe, stay well, and try not to take this episode as more pressure to do more things. It's meant to be here just to help you kind of develop your skills as you go along and really bring out the best in you for the children. So take care, make sure that you look after yourself, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye. Mind That Childminder. Find us on Facebook, X and Instagram for more about upcoming episodes. All topics discussed are intended for entertainment and educational purposes. This podcast is not intended to give any legal advice and is purely an opinion and supportive piece.